All right. Just so you know, that was the debut, so I looped it, right? We'll go with that. Welcome to everyone to CRPN Central. Big shout out to Mitch Hilby for helping me make that video. What an amazing upgrade to CRPN Central. This is the podcast dedicated to bringing some of the best in the industry right here on stage so that we can talk about our challenges, find solutions, and get something done about it. Coming onto the stage is techno wizard Mitch Hilby. Mitch Hilby, how are you doing, sir?
I love that I'm a wizard today. That's fantastic
It's a
for me.
wizard. Yeah, I really appreciate Mitch. That video you made me, you did an amazing job, and you added some caliber to CRPN. I'm also going to bring on Lauren Stockwell, our two guests, or our two hosts. Hi, Mitch. Hi, Lauren.
Hello.
So,
Happy Wednesday.
happy Wednesday.
Also,
Today
your
we're gonna.
background kind of matches the DJ theme going on.
Oh, that's right. Get the little.
Yeah.
eSource. We get to talk about technology today, and I got to use new technology. It didn't work as well as I wanted. I even practiced it, but I still did it. It worked, and you know what? It was better than before. And I think that's the whole point of this podcast. So, did you have a chance to listen to the podcast interview? I know it was a little while since we recorded it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got a good one time in. I don't listen to him as many times as Lauren does. But eSource is normally in some of these episodes there's some like good degree of comparison, but everything aligns here. I mean, everyone on the podcast today, we're all adopters of eSource. We're all believers. There's no debate between paper versus eSource. While you can maybe see some benefits in the other, we're all team eSource today, I think. So it's going to be an interesting conversation for sure.
Yeah, we're all moving in the same direction on the same team. And it was definitely an interesting one. And Mitch is exactly correct. I did watch this episode about 5 times.
It aged well. That's what I have to say. There are things that are different now. And so we're going to bring on our guests. We're not going to cut it any further, but Nadege Gunn, Dr. Gunn, Raymond Nomizu. Oh my goodness.
Hi.
Welcome to CRPN Central. Thank you so much. You were one of the first to believe in CRPN Central, to be able to be on the podcast and talk about eSource, to really have a good conversation. And when I say aged well, it's only because, oh my gosh, so much has changed since this podcast debuted. And so will both of you please introduce yourselves? And by the way, just mention something that's different now versus when you recorded this podcast. It was just over a year ago.
Yeah. Thank you. I'll start. I'm Raymond Nomizu, co-founder and co-CEO of Creo. We launched Creo back in 2016, and I think at that point, eSource was a very novel concept, controversial. A lot of people thought it was a fad, a fly-by-night, but I think it's very much a mainstream product now. So glad to see that. We're all part of the Creo family in a way. Dr. Gunn is with a client of ours. Was with standalone site Impact Research Institute, now with Velocity Clinical Research. That's one of the big trends in the industry, is the rise of site networks, who really do need eSource to run, especially when you're scaling out at multiple locations. You need more technology to do that. And Mitch and Lauren, you're both partners in our new partner program, right? I think trials and clinical research fast track. Yeah, so we launched the partners directory. This is actually new from a year ago. All Creo clients now have access to partner directory within the help center, and they can find essentially vendors that are offering products or services directly to research sites. And the assurance they have is if someone is part of our partner directory, they can work within the confines of our software. So we have vendors that provide basic site operational services such as e-regulatory, EDC entry, which I think is really cool. It's the fact that you can outsource even offshore EDC entry. That's all made possible through eSource. Finance and billing. We have some business development. We have a lot of recruiting and lead gen vendors, and anyone that is a recruiting or lead gen vendor can actually send leads in through the API directly to Creo. So if you're a site, you don't have to go to a separate login, grab a lead, and then double enter the data, right? So it's so much better for everyone involved. So we've had very strong uptake with the partners. program. But it's part of our goal and our vision of becoming like an ecosystem and a platform and an enabler.
Yep. That just came up too. We just interviewed Matt Smith about site tech stack expectations, and he said that too. Ecosystem. We've got to build an ecosystem.
Mhm.
Dr. Gunn, would you be willing to introduce yourself?
Oh, of course. So I'm Nadege Gunn. I'm a gastrohepatology, obesity medicine trained physician, but more importantly, I've been in research a long time to respect the hustle of paper source and also to evolve into eSource. And Raymond, actually, we go way further back than Impact Research, because Impact Research was a site that I started a few years ago. We were recently acquired by Velocity Clinical Research. But prior to that, I was at Pinnacle Research, where Raymond had introduced himself and was dealing with some of our leadership there when we decided to go from paper to electronic. And so it goes far back, and I'm very happy to be using eSource and happy to be part of this discussion. I know Lauren, she trained some of our stellar coordinators. I've never met you, Mitch, but I've heard so many great things about Diversity Trials. So I'm happy to be here. So thank you for inviting me.
Oh, thank you so much for coming. And just as you said, so Impact is now Velocity. I remember I was listening to it and Creo was like, oh yeah, we're working on a training and certification for Creo. Guess what? That's out. Oh yeah, we're working on EMR integration. Oh, we got Pluto, right? Was it Pluto?
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's out.
So it's been a year, Raymond, but I swear you've done like 5 years worth of work in this 1 year at Creo.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about with the center of workflow concept. That's what you were talking about on that podcast. And you're getting there. You bring up those words like APIs and sending patients that you started off with, sending patients directly to those sites on Creo. That's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot more coming too. There's a lot more in our roadmap.
I can't wait.
There's actually central labs are on the horizon.
Oh boy, is it going to be ready for SCRS?
It'll be demoable. Yes, it should be live by then. Yes.
Okay.
I think we'll have
It's
live
in 6 weeks.
Underway.
So if you're going to SCRS, ask Raymond or any of the Creo team about central labs. Have we said too much?
No, just central labs. We saw
Raymond can say whatever he wants.
Yeah, let's do like a code word. Operation Batcave.
You heard it here first.
Dr. Gunn, you'll appreciate the ability to see past lab values for the same patient over time.
Yes, trending the labs, being able to have all labs funnel into one place, and you can assess them electronically and not really just a PDF that you're writing on. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yep. That's the vision.
That's awesome.
That's wonderful. That would really take care of a lot of the issues that we have currently. So looking forward to that.
That's actually really great too, because I know when Dr. Gunn was talking about some of those conveniences as an investigator, I saw a lot of those same similarities as a CRA for many years as well. And it's that ability to kind of remotely and kind of quickly, no matter where you are, you can get in and check those values. But trends was always one of those things that you still had to go back and kind of identify, or you keep them in the back of your mind, like, yep, I remember this patient was having XYZ issues previously, and you're going to kind of watch that trend yourself. But with the built-in flow, that's great.
So 42 days, right? The magical universal world number 42. We got 42 days to talk about labs at Creo. All right. So this podcast was on eSource. So we'll drill into eSource. So if you listen to the original interview, this was episode 10 of CRPN Central. And just to put it into perspective, we just are recording now episode 28. This was 18 episodes ago. It's been a while, but it aged very well. We talked about eSource with a site PI, a very dedicated site PI, a very good PI who wants attention to detail, and an innovator, arguably one of the pioneer innovators of the industry, the one who saw this back in 2008, 2009 and said, you know what, let's do this. And even the industry surprised Raymond. He said, I wasn't expecting the site industry market to be so vibrant in CTMS, but it has just exploded to enterprise level capabilities, even to the point where we might actually see some hybrid site network CRO activity coming, especially when we can start to deliver the data to the sponsors. Did I get that right, Raymond?
I think so. I think that's quite possible. It's a little bit of a sensitive topic, obviously, because sites obviously get study opportunities from CROs. But I think it's a very delicate dance. I think it's on the horizon. I'm not the only one saying this. There was an analyst report that came out and effectively said something similar.
Yeah. Or it's going to be CROs buying site networks and essentially doing the same thing. It'll be a hybrid from both ends, and we're already seeing that in the marketplace.
We're already seeing that with IQVIA and Avocare and CCPN, right? And like the different organizations kind of picking things up. And, you know, as this industry kind of develops, it's interesting to have people who are so willing to be on the cutting edge. And you guys talked a lot in the podcast about like comfort zones and people getting out of their comfort zones and what that looks like. How have you guys found it best when implementing eSource and when implementing other innovative things? I mean, even just this lab stuff that you're talking about, Raymond. How have you found it best for listeners on the line to implement those big, scary things that, you know, are coming in at us to get people out of their comfort zones? Do you guys have any best practices around that? I think that that's something that listeners might be interested to hear.
I wish I had the silver bullet. You know, honestly, so we've been selling in the marketplace eSource for close to 10 years now. And even today, there are a lot of sites that don't feel comfortable making the change. And, you know, a lot of times sites, you know, we'll hear all kinds of reasons and excuses, and they're just, you know, I mean, I can tell it boils down to, I just don't like change, but it might be dressed up in terms of like quality or compliance or response for this or that or something else other than I just don't like change. I mean, I honestly don't have the answer for you, because I think a lot of it depends on like almost like a psychographic profile of the person. Like, are you motivated to change? Like, do you want it? Sometimes it could be like there's an event that like triggers that. We've seen that too, like a major quality finding will often trigger a site to say, you know, we got to go on eSource because that's our kappa for this and our 10 other deviations. So that an event could trigger that, but a lot of times I think it boils down to the personalities of the leaders and their comfort with it and their approach philosophy.
So Dr. Gunn,
I think the event.
Yeah, you had
there
said
was an event that triggered it for us, and that was COVID. COVID was the event, right? And so when you have a limited number of people who could be on a site at a certain period of time, you're gloved and gowned, and you just want to get in and see that patient and get out. You're appreciating that the patient even came to the visit during that time. It was nice to have eSource so you can go back to your home computer and then recap the events of that meeting without putting yourself or the patient at any additional risk. So COVID did necessitate eSource for us in a way. And I think as far as how, to your question, Lauren, how do you deploy something like this of such great magnitude across a group of individuals who may be a little bit averse to change? Is just small bite-sized portions and getting someone who's really motivated that they trust to be the champion of the movement and to train and hold the hands of those who might be a little bit reluctant. So I think for us, it was COVID that precipitated a demand for doing this a different way, because we're not going to chase papers during that time. And then of course, having small pieces and people that were motivated that we could trust to help us along the way with training.
Yeah. And I love that you said, that this thing triggered you and you kind of were forced into it. I think that it's such an interesting thing to look back and say like, okay, what did that do for us? And were we able to rise to that occasion? And were we able to kind of continue on from that? Out of curiosity, when you guys are looking for those super users or those champions at different organizations, and especially at the bigger organizations, Dr. Gunn, I'm sure that Velocity has a huge hand in what that super user looks like as they kind of move across the industry and as they move across the thing. I always joke that in this industry, we are on the cutting edge of medicine and we're innovating the next generation of medicine. And we're so excited to bring this really cool possible outcome and give people back more birthdays and all these fabulous things. but then we can't seem to, incorporate something like eSource in an effective and functioning way. So I'm curious your guys' thoughts on personality traits or things that you want to look for in that super user or champion. What is the most important thing to you when you're looking for that person at a specific organization? Or Raymond, maybe from your perspective, do you have any feedback that you guys give to your site users of like, hey, if you want somebody to actually functionally integrate this in, I would recommend looking for somebody with this type of personality or wanting to do these types of activities or these types of trainings or whatever that looks like?
Usually when an organization is picking up a new technology like Creo, there naturally emerges from the organization the people that are enthusiastic. And there's pretty much consensus within the organization. Hey, look, this person loves this technology. They're the natural champion. So it's usually pretty obvious. I think if I had to do kind of one defining characteristic, I think it's a hunger for growth and improvement. Like I feel like people that are serious about clinical research and they want to grow the business, they want to improve, they want to do better. They're very open to eSource, and maybe they're not the people that adopt tech first, because I get some people don't want to be the first, and they want others to. But those are the people that constantly say, "Hey, what can I do better? How can I improve this?" Right? I think that's the key factor in my mind. So, when we first started selling, before the rise of a lot of professional site networks, I think research was, very much a small business, and I think the stereotype is kind of like the doctor doing this on the side, couple of coordinators, right? You have a couple of coordinators and they might be, like 5 or 6 years away from retirement. They got a nice thing going, side income, right? There was absolutely no motivation. So those are the hardest groups to convince, right? But really, I think what's helped us is kind of the rise of professional site networks and integrated research organizations and people that really want to make this a business and grow.
The ownership around research, right? Having ownership around that research. Sorry, I collaboratively interrupt. My bad.
No, well, Dr. Gunn, I was going to ask what you've seen, because you've been on the other side.
I feel like the personality type, as you were asking for that champion or super user, is someone who already naturally is an innovator or innovative in the organization, and maybe already can find ways to streamline workflows. So for me, it was a nurse practitioner who was always creating spreadsheets to keep us organized and make sure we didn't miss visits or miss assessments that needed to happen. She was already doing that on her own, creating ways through Excel or through other means to help me to just be a better investigator. And then when we had someone like Raymond show us that this can be possible without having to do all that extra side work, that was enlightening, and then we were able to take it on. So I think that you definitely want champions within your organization that understand your particular needs and workflow. So maybe a coordinator's needs and workflow might be different from an investigator's. So you might need individual people within the organization who have familiarity with what types of things would make a difference for you, and then help you to learn.
Have you ever run into the situation, Raymond or Dr. Gunn, where you go into a site, they're looking into eSource, and then you've got that seasoned employee who says, if you adopt this, I'm quitting. I'm out of here. I don't want to deal with this. I've got 1 year to retirement. I don't want to learn something new. Have you ever run into those as you go through sites?
Oh, yeah.
Gunn, you have?
For sure, yes. Especially with people in regulatory.
Wow.
You're doing it the same way
I've been filing the IRB on my Excel spreadsheet for 20 years, and I don't want to learn something different.
Right,
I'm too old for
shaking their finger too.
Right. They're like, this will never pass.
Yeah.
The whole time shaking their
finger. And that's actually an education thing,
when they're doing,
right? So
when they're doing regulatory,
right? The willingness to accept new things.
Yeah, I am absolutely shocked by that, honestly, Dr. Gunn. I thought that would instantly be like no, we haven't run into that situation, but like we definitely had people, I could see resistance. I could see that, but like the fact that people are literally willing to quit or not do it, right? I mean, those are your two options. It's like the ultimatum. That is insane to me, because especially in this day and age, right? We're in a generation and in 2024 where everything is tech-based. I mean, you can't walk anywhere or check into any appointment without technology. I take my Pilates class and I have to check in on the app before I go in. I'm literally standing in front of the front desk and they say, "Did you check in on the app?" And I'm like, "Can you
I'm here.
I'm here," right? And so they have you check in on the app in front of them. And so it's a very interesting thing to hear that there are people that are so stuck in the Stone Ages that are unwilling to even be open-minded. And I think that that's something that we need to continue to push in this industry specifically, and really in any industry, is this open-mindedness to change, and this, I guess, taking from what has worked to what will work in the future. I think so often if we stay stuck in our ways and we continue to do the same thing and expect a different result or expect a better result, we are literally defining ourselves into this insane realm. And I think that it's so important that we continue to keep an open mind about all these different things. So next time that people are going, anybody who's listening, going to conferences, like even if the organization, right, Raymond's going to present to you guys this central lab thing at SCRS Global, fantastic, wonderful, but keep an open mind about it. Even if you don't know that it's going to work for your organization, like listen to him, hear him out, be open to the conversation, and come away with something that you've learned. I think that that's something that we all need to work on, is walking into every conversation thinking that there's something to learn and something to gain from it.
Yeah. So there's one big difference, Raymond, from now since the last time we recorded this. Does anyone remember last year's SCRS survey to sites about the adoption of eSource and technology and the percentage of sites that adopted or that were willing to adopt?
Oh, very God. High.
So
do you remember what the number was? It was what?
I thought it was over 2/3.
It was 38%, maybe 36%.
That were willing to adopt, or
that
not?
were willing to adopt or open to adopting. So we were under half on that survey. That was last year. At SCRS West, just when was that?
June.
April, May? June. It was June. I'm losing my months. That same survey was asked. That number went from 30s to 76%.
It's wild.
So awareness and adoption of the people making podcasts, talking about the quality of technology in clinical research, we can have a better opportunity for our patients. It's working according to those surveys.
I'm curious to see this. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was going to say, I think a big part of that is just there's a lot of support certainly among CRAs. Like, so we hear CRAs, they saw this, coming out in trickles several years back, and now they're starting to see it over and over again. And we actually hear CRAs actually referring their own sites over to Creo and said, "Hey, look, you guys will benefit from using Creo." And so I hear a lot from sites that the sponsors and CROs that they work with are happy when they tell them that they use eSource. So I think that's part of the driver as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Raymond, to that point, I mean, that goes a long way in that change management process, because that's one of the biggest troubles that I found, as a CRA, even with sites that are integrating or adopting like that eSource tech, is change management is going to look different for every single site. So I know, like Dr. Gunn, change management with impact, wildly different approach than how it would be for velocity, just by sheer scale, right, of the organization. So it takes this unique approach for each one. It's always going to look different, but having those players like your CRA support, if you have your ClinOps team with the CROs and the sponsors that you're working with on your current studies, and they're fully supportive and they're behind you and they're like, yeah, we can help walk through this. Like, we can help work with you on those implemented changes. That's huge. I mean, that's a big thing for me as well.
Mm-hmm. And so Dr. Gunn, I wanted to come back to you on one of the comments you had on the podcast during your interview. And it was on specifically allowing the oversight of the PI to be much easier with eSource. You can just, instead of having all the tabs on your desk to sign, you just open up your computer. You can be anywhere to do it. You can delegate. You can have a really clear view of what's going on in the trial, whether it's a visit check-in or whatever it might be. Do you see from the PI world how that is readily adopted? Like, in other words, PIs really love this, or are there some PIs out there that don't really exercise that oversight?
Well, I think I try to be the model PI, of course, but I do know that as physicians or clinicians, we're very busy and we're pulled in many different directions. But say, for instance, I'm in endoscopy and I'm doing colonoscopies and I have a patient that's running late. I can't run back to the site to go find the tab to comment on a comment that maybe a CRA left behind. But I can pull up Creo in the endoscopy suite while I'm waiting for the patient to be prepped and review things in real time as the comments are coming in. And I think that's revolutionary. And it's definitely something that many appreciate, because you'll have a CRA on site monitoring your study while you're busy upstairs, and they can say something to you in the chart and you could answer them right then and there without having to be there.
That's an amazing.
So that's what I think is the value here. And I bet if our PI community was aware of how important and how it changes the way we can practice and we can multitask, they would appreciate what it is, what the opportunity is.
You're essentially empowering an investigator to not only investigate and to participate actively in clinical research, but not to sacrifice and compromise their practice to do it. You just make it a stream-flowed workflow, so that, having that extra burden of being a PI is no longer an excuse.
Right. And if there was ever any hesitancy for a person who might have been offered the opportunity to conduct trials, because there are a lot of clinicians out there that have a very unique population that would be great to be investigated and researched, but maybe they're hesitant because they're like, I don't have time. This is too much. But if they knew that we can integrate these types of resources, maybe they would reconsider.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I agree.
I mean, oversight's got to be one of those biggest concerns, right? If you can't make sure that you have the quality time to be able to have the oversight of your patients in the trial, why would you want to do that as a medical provider? Right. I don't think it's a responsible decision. But to your point, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I could add a comment, and if I know it's a question specifically for my PI, I could just at Dr. Gunn, ask you that question directly.
That's
and then you get a little notification in there and everything.
That's correct. And when things are happening real time at our site, and say my sub-investigator saw a patient that day and I'm in clinic, I have Creo open while I'm in clinic, and her and I are communicating all the time. I know exactly what happened, the patient that she's concerned about. I can check in the chart, look at the medications, and be a real player in that team.
Right.
Yeah. That's a really, really cool point too. And like having that ownership and oversight is going to be so important as you continue to build out the business too. And as you continue to grow. And so for, like anybody who's wanting to build out their business and wanting to continue to grow it, incorporating something like eSource is the best way to do it, in my opinion, because then you are able to, again, real time watch it, right? You kind of have that pulse check at all points in time.
Right.
And people be like, hey,
don't say real time. This is Creo.
Oh, sorry. Later.
No,
either way, the point is and whether you use one system or another, right? The whole point is the eSource concept as a whole enables that pulse check to be able to check in at all points in time and have that thing. I was laughing so hard, and I put it in our little chat right here at your little comment of like, I'm watching, here I am. And right, I was giggling every single time.
She used the word tickle. I'll send him a little tickle, just to let you know.
a little
I
wink.
think, I think you touched on a couple workflows, Dr. Gunn, that I think a lot of people say, okay, well, why can't the site just enter in directly into the EDC? Because isn't that kind of the same thing? And so I think a lot of people think of this as just like a means of capturing data. But I think one of the things that we did when we built out Creo very consciously was think of the data collection process as collaborative. Right. So there's, like as an investigator, you have to go in and make interpretations. You have to sort of respond to questions from your coordinator staff. So the ability to ping each other and communicate each other in a private setting, the ability to leave draft progress notes that you're not ready to publish yet. There's a collaborative aspect to this. And so as a site, when you're ready to publish the data, then you push it, then you take an action, right? So you have control over the data flow process until you're ready to push it in there. And I think people who don't do research, I think they underestimate that. I think they don't understand that. And that's the value of this. It's like, it's like your workspace, right? And it gives you control over when you're ready to finalize a source. Would you agree with that, Dr. Gunn? Like, is that one of the big differences between like us and like, say, enter directly into an EDC?
Yes, I think it's our first line of, the right of first refusal is CREO. Like, we use it as our communication tool, as our platform to enter our thoughts and make revisions as we need to, and then publish when we're ready. Mm-hmm. As we learn more information, especially around like SAEs, we might learn a little bit today, but then a little bit more later, and we're just crafting our argument. So
right,
yeah. Well, with COVID, I know I personally saw a spike because I was still working in like the ClinOps side at that point. We saw a spike in industry with like S37, where it's like that direct data entry process, and I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah, I mean, on a contract level too, that's you have to have, no pun intended, but the one source of truth, and the one source of truth is not paid for or controlled by sponsors, the consumers of the service. It has to be the site, the PI, the one that's responsible for storing this safely for 15 to 30 years. That's the one who has to hold the source. EDC, sorry, EDC, but it's literally just a copy of the source that could be delivered to the sponsor as a service.
Well, one of the other things
turn that into truth.
Yeah, one of the other things Raymond brought up too was, that frustration we all have with data managers. Sorry, data managers, but the DM team gets terribly frustrating, especially for sites, especially as we're getting to like, study closeout time. Everybody's scrambling, the monitoring team is losing their mind, and it's all trickling down to the sites. Mm-hmm. DMs doing additional checks, additional queries, adjusting parameters as they are now finding out that data lock that now, we missed these before, so we're going to issue 450 more queries this week, that we had missed the entire study. And if you have that direct data entry, I mean, it's a little bit different than, just querying it in EDC, because EDC, you can enter that data, you have control of that data that you're entering, from your eSource. Because I don't want DM querying my source all the time, as a site. I don't want DM touching that. So
we have this model, so this is where it gets interesting. We have a model, say, like there's, a site network is, let's just say, sole sourcing a study. It happens these days, right? Everything's being collected in CREO eSource. Then you say, okay, do we really need a secondary EDC to transcribe the data? Which, by the way, that data at the end of the study gets extracted from the EDC. It comes out as a file. So the EDC is just a holding tank for the people. Have to understand that. Like, the goal is not to populate the EDC. The goal is to spit the data out of the EDC so it gets transformed into a stats program. So you stop thinking about the data journey, it kind of doesn't make any sense. So we do have a tool where the monitoring team can review the data as the data is being collected. Well, once a visit is saved, it creates a queue and it tees up all the changes and everything. We recommend a single review process. So instead of having the monitors look at the data and then data management look at the data, just have what we call clinical data monitoring, which is, have most likely CRA trained individuals review the data and do the queries that data manager would normally have done. Because CRAs can understand data queries. They understand how to interrogate data, and they also understand the clinical aspects of it. And you get rid of that redundant layer of review, and you're also getting rid of SDV. So if you have that, then you have, and this is how I feel strongly about this, you have clinically trained people reviewing clinical data. That is how it should be. I've had many data managers tell me, oh, we can't look at progress notes. I'm like, why? Well, because it might say something that undermines the structured data. I'm like, well, then you query. Isn't that your job? I mean, you'd rather not know. Like, your goal in life is not have transparency. Like, but they can't, like most data managers, they're not clinically trained. So they don't know how to interpret a progress note. So don't know how to understand or interpret clinical data, then why are you reviewing clinical data? So in other words, you want to dumb the data down to match your skill set. No. Have the right skilled people review the data. So clinical people should review clinical data. And if, as a CRA, you say, okay, this is above my pay grade, I'll bring the medical monitor. Well, that's where the eSource reviewer comes in. You could say, hey, medical monitor, look at this. This is more of an investigator conversation, right? That's how it should be. So it should just be site collects the data, and then a clinically trained team reviews, interrogates the data just once. But that is way more efficient than the current process. Otherwise, if all the data is being collected in Creo eSource and people are being made to enter it into another system, it is essentially a jobs program at that point. I mean, it's just no other way to describe it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You know, you have to have that. You have to have that 100% eSource adoption though for that to work. You can't have some sites.
Well, it's happening now on a lot of trials, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, that's the easiest argument. Like, and if there's like 50%, 60% already baked in, can you get the other sites to use Creo, eSource? Okay, that's a different conversation. I get that, but there are a lot of situations right now where our own sites are the only sites on the trial, and they're still being made to enter data in, and you've got that double review process and the SDV and sponsors paying for it. Everybody thinks that's normal. And I'm like making this argument, and they look at me like, give me this like
that's an interesting point. That's one thing that could be controlled. Do you ever see a world where the monitoring plan in a protocol is 100% eSource? Like, to be in this trial, you have to have eSource as an operation, as a site.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Have you ever heard of that yet? Has anyone done it yet?
Yeah, I mean, there's entire remote monitoring plans. I mean, you have to make exceptions, regarding at least the monitoring aspect, right? To allow on-site visits at times when it's required. Like, there might be a time that, I mean, if you have IP on site, like I have to be able to get on there, potentially go to your site, evaluate everything that's going on, especially if there's significant issues that start to show up a trend. But, as far as the eSource goes, yeah, I mean, it's just part of the site selection process. Even thinking back to some of the other programs like SIP, it was integrated as like you have to adopt SIP or you're not going to work with us. So 100% you can do that.
I can't agree with you more, Raymond, about this redundancy of work and how it should just have a clinically minded person looking at that data so that it's just a one and done. I wonder if you've had the opportunity within your organization or even any of you to show sponsors the cost savings behind having this be one streamlined effort. Because if you have to bring me in 3 times and I'm charging you by the hour, you're losing money. And then the other thing is too, and to your point again, it's reviewed once by the monitor on site. There's source data verifying that what you wrote in your source matches what's in EDC. Then 10 years later, Mitch, to your point, someone is looking at it and disagrees with everything that was put in. And now they're querying you 400 or 500 times. And then medical monitor is brought in and say, well, I agree totally with you, Dr. Gunn. What's the question here? And so, and then now you're doing this vicious cycle of amending SAE report or whatever it is. So it matches everybody's toolkit or their algorithm or whatever it is that they're looking at. So I think that this is something we should probably invest a good amount of time to see what cost savings are. And a lot of the times that's what people need to see to make the change.
Yeah. As far as cost savings go, I mean, whenever you do save costs, I mean, someone else doesn't make money. And so, by the way, Dr. Gunn, I wanted to talk about CRAs and monitoring visits, because you had a very interesting opinion about that during the podcast. And it was, you liked that personal touch where you could touch paper with another person and go over things and have a conversation. And we were talking about how sometimes it's not as personal when it comes to remote monitoring and things like that. Throughout the year, as you've done more remote monitoring, have there been any strategies that you've seen CRAs do or you've adopted so that you can make it a little more personal while at the same time being remote?
Well, I find that, at least for all the sponsors that we've worked with and CROs to that matter, they've never let it be 100% remote. We see those CRAs on a regular cadence. But what I have noticed though with remote monitoring is they want to be in your source like 24/7. So you have to start having some boundaries and say, no, you get the first Tuesday of every, month, and you can't just be in our source all day. But no, I think for right now, it's been where there's a cadence of their visits. We see them, we do make that contact, but then we also appreciate when they can do their work remotely, so we can still be very much in the visits and the things that we have to do on site.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. I think also part of that relationship issue and the concern, it depends on the CRA. I mean, as like a lead CRA and working with, dozens and having tons of colleagues that are CRAs, not everybody's personable, even if you're on site. You know what I mean? Not everybody's going to build a good rapport. Like, I'll show up and give you a hug and we can go get like lunch together. That's fine. But not everybody's going to do that. So it really kind of depends on who you get. But the other problem I found in that transition we had from industry where everything is on site to then now trying to push more remote visits from the ClinOps, mega CRO perspective, it was, how can we maximize CRA time? How can we maximize the output of how many reports they're getting? How many site visits can we get? Let's increase the frequency of visits, that they can handle. And it kind of, I say kind of, it absolutely has a negative impact on the quality of monitoring that's able to occur. Those metrics are based off of how many reports you're getting out each month.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I can, from a site's perspective, and we put this in, we put this in every CTA for a reason, but whenever it talks about scheduling of monitoring visits, it's always mutually agreeable business hours. And the reason why you have to call it mutually agreeable is because as a site, you might have 20, 30, 50 trials going on at once, and you have a monitoring room that seats 2 people. So you can't have on-site monitoring events for more than 2 to 3 trials at a time when you're doing it like physical only. However, if you were to be able to do remote monitoring visits, you could host many monitoring visits at a single time, far more than you could if you were limited to the physical space of your site to accommodate those monitors. And so I think that it's really good to have that personal, and I say hand up. Go ahead, Lauren.
Sorry. No, and just to like touch more on physical space too, like allowing space for eSource, like I think Dr. Gunn, you touched on this in your conversation, and really Raymond, you did too, as well as like the binders that exist and the ways that we're able to save space, save energy, and therefore create more space for patients to be visited. I recently visited the, and I know Daniel and Mitch did as well, the local DM site here in Phoenix during the West had a kickoff, and like they were squeezing every little part, right? They had all these really cool rooms that were kind of really utilizing the space as efficiently as humanly possible. And when you're integrated inside of a hospital, when you're integrated inside of a clinic, you probably don't have a ton of space to store all these things. And so paying for, right? How much are you saving in offsite storage? How much are you saving in time, energy, and how much more potential income gain are you acquiring because you're opening up more space for patients to be seen, and for patients to be enrolled, and for patients to be treated and potentially seen, incorporated into the trial. So that's another point on space.
Yeah, I mean, easily like an entire space for an entire exam room. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I've been at some sites where they actually had like those rolling library shelves. You got to connect the wheels and you're moving shelves back and forth to get to the section that you need to, just because they're trying to maximize the efficiency at the time for how many, reg binders and patient files that they could store. And that's how you used to have to do it.
Time and space. I mean, both of those constraints open up. So, I've had a lot of clients say, hey, look, when we went on eSource, I used to do, 20 studies a year. Now I can do 25 or 30, or I'm hearing 25, 30% productivity gains. I mean, that's huge, right? If you add all that revenue as a site and your expenses are fixed, I mean, that's a big financial impact. And now I'm really, really excited because, with the partner program, there are actually companies now that can provide resources to do EDC entry on behalf of the site staff. So the PI can delegate to the EDC entry out. I actually know of a site client of ours that gets EDC entry overnight. I mean, they have something like 80% of their data is entered within 1 business day, something like 80%. I mean, it's mind blowing. So first of all, the performance is way better, right, than any other site out there. Secondly, their coordinators are freed of that EDC responsibility. In fact, not only the coordinators are freed of the EDC responsibility, they don't even have to answer queries, because this service will also answer queries, because half of the queries, you don't necessarily need to actually ping the coordinator. And if they
let
do,
your outsource people talk to my outsource people, and we'll just focus on the job that we need to do.
Well, and they're literally like, in Hyderabad, they're literally like down the hall from the data management asking these questions. And if there's any questions for the site staff, they'll just ping the site staff using Creo's comment section, so the site staff can stay within the Creo system. So just think about what that means from a productivity gain, just freeing up EDC, data entry, and query resolution while boosting your own metrics and leveraging offshore rates. I mean, how's that not a game changer?
I've worked with some of the sites like that when I was still in the ClinOps side, and that was the only hang up that I did have, was that communication was sometimes a barrier between the data entry people when it's being outsourced and then the CRCs, because there are oftentimes queries that are just going to be repetitive because this is clearly incorrect. Like, it's wildly wrong. And I understand that that's what the source says, but data entry enters per source. They're not correcting source. So when you do actually realize something's wrong and something needs to be fixed by the coordinator, or the PI needs to address something, it's those communication pathways. And, oftentimes, again, as like a CRA, that's something that I would put on my team or myself to say, well, I'm going to just reach out to the site and tell them, I can pull a list of queries and email it to them. It's pretty easy as well. So.
Yeah, but not every CRA is doing that, right? Is taking
Probably,
the
So Dr. Gunn, I had another question for you. And now that you get the visibility of velocity and what you're seeing here, one of the things that we talked about, I think it was in Raymond's interview, was how it's just hard for sites to invest in technology. That's all there is to it. They either can't afford it, they don't have the time to make the logistics. Like, depending on the site network, it's just impossible. It's like trying to steer a cruise ship too hard, make it turn too hard, and you'll break the rudder. How do you think that sites might be able to more easily or readily even consider the investment or adoption of technology?
Well, I hate to make this a Creo commercial, Raymond, but when I was venturing to start my own site, definitely finances and resources were at a minimum. You're just a doctor in the streets just hustling, and you're like, I like this Creo thing, but it's probably so expensive. How can you help? And fortunately, and I'm sure many other programs that offer this service may also do it, they offered like a startup rate. They recognize that you're not going to just have a ton of money hanging around, and that they would be so gracious as to let you get going and get your faculties about you before the charge was really a big one, because they want you to make money to then pay to pay money. So that was a beautiful thing. So there was like this startup rate from a service that should not be mentioned, but a startup rate was very affordable. You can get your studies plugged in and start seeing how the flow would go. And then after year one, after you've been able to screen and randomize your first patient, that's when you started to really owe the money. So I think if other programs, Creo or otherwise, have something like that and can showcase that to people that might be on the fence or a little bit worried about the investment, that works beautifully.
Yeah, I love that, because it's like a hook, right? I mean, that's the point, is like any good salesperson, I always say, before you show them what you have to show them that you care. And so I think saying like, we want to invest in what we see you doing and how we see you going is such an important thing for vendors in general. Give them a chance to get it at a low rate and get in and feel like they're getting a good deal. And then they'll get so comfortable in that process, right? Comfort zones are such a thing. And we talked about it earlier, but like, if they get comfortable in the process of using you, they're going to now take that process into how they grow. And then the next time that they shift organizations, I bet you they will take access to the next one too. And they'll continue to be an advocate and a super user and a champion of it if you get them in at the ground.
Right. And it was a very no risk, easy process to just start getting familiar with the technology, play with it in an environment that didn't put you under a lot of pressure where you're just, gosh, I'm leaking all this money out each month or something. No, it was a flat introductory rate. You're a startup, go get them. And then once you get your footing, now we can all do fine.
I'm so glad it worked out. It's really nice to hear a story like that. That's wonderful. Yeah, that's why we had that program, because we recognize, how dear cash is. I mean, so maybe I shouldn't be saying this, but in our contracts, if someone's after the first year, if somebody wants out, we give them a 90-day out. I mean, obviously, if we have some kind of a customized contract with a term, there's a term, but our standard contract, we don't like to hold people to it. I'm philosophically opposed to clients paying money because they signed a piece of paper. I'd rather they pay money because they get value out of it, right? So, we don't want to force people to use Creo because they signed something 5 years ago, right?
You just want to make sure to stay.
They're using it.
I don't think I've ever met someone who's been part of electronic source or what have you and has said, gosh, I really wish we were paper now. I haven't seen that go the other way. I know people might miss some elements of the paper, but once you started to do electronic anything in research, it really makes a difference.
Well, so I will say the case studies, there's some groups we talked about at the conference. There are some sites out there who are saying, I got a 483 because of eSource.
What?
Yes.
Explain that. This is great. Let's talk about
audit trail.
They blame eSource, but what it turns out is it was complete user error. Yeah, they used eSource, but they didn't create the processes to use it properly.
Right.
But because of that, they blamed Creo, or not Creo. It wasn't Creo. It was a CTMS. Yeah. But they blamed eSource, not themselves. That's the only case that I've seen where that's been a thing.
Always. I heard a lot of that. Raymond brought up earlier too, is like that kind of that CRA adoption and support for the Creo system. When it was first coming out, there was a lot of frustration even on that side from the monitoring teams because it's something new that we had to adopt and it was something new that we had to learn. And then some sites are on it, some sites aren't. So you're jumping back and forth, right? Mm-hmm. But there were a lot of times that I would hear similar frustrations almost to that point, Fox, where it's like, oh, I hated this site was on Creo. I hated it. The system sucked. Like it didn't work. And I'm like, well, did it, or was it just like user error? Were they, were they not using it properly? Like you couldn't get it. There was nothing in there because they weren't putting it in there. Right. That's part of the problem. Same thing with like eReg or anything. It's the tools are only tools.
Yeah, garbage in, garbage out. That's that's the But I've had CRA say, "I hope you have Creo." Like, do you have Creo? Because if you do, great. Because we can work with that.
Yeah.
And Raymond's over here like, hey man, don't shoot the messenger. We're fine. It's program it properly. Have your processes in place so you update your amendments and make sure that you have the communication pathways. Again, Creo can offer it to you, but they're not. I mean, I don't know if they program. You do programming services, right?
We have a bundle of services that we can provide.
There's bundles of services. Get it. If you don't know how to program it, pay someone to program it, and then that will pay for itself.
Yeah, we will design a study. It's a service that we make available at an affordable price to all of our client sites. I mean, we can't do the job of the sites for them. I mean, if they're not fundamentally doing their work properly, eSource in some ways can make it transparent.
Right.
And
but I find that having the eSource has made. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Raymond. I didn't just.
No. Go ahead. I'm done.
I just was going to say that having the eSource has helped us to recognize recurring mistakes we were making. Like, for instance, if there is a vital sign that needs to be collected 5 minutes after resting or something, our CRA needs to point it out one time, and then we program the source to remind us to not make that mistake again. And that was something that we could easily do. Going back to paper, you would forget that your CRA reminded you, hey guys, they need to be supine for 5 minutes before you repeat that assessment. And now Creo is like, boom, were they resting for 5 minutes? And then you're like, oh yeah, let me take a step back and calm down for a minute before I do that next assessment. So I think it's really saved us from deviations.
For sure.
Well, same thing with
when used properly, absolutely will.
When used properly, that's the key, Raymond. When used properly. If I take a laptop and I try to use it as a hammer and I hit that nail and I break the laptop, I say, stupid laptop, this doesn't work. It's not how this works. That's not. You have to use the right tool for the right job in the right way. We have 4 minutes left, and I did want to ask one more question, and that was, we had a little bit of a predictive story in this interview. What do you think is going to happen? Some of it came true over the last year, some of it hasn't. If you were to interview me again in a year, what do you think is going to happen the next year as far as eSource adoption and technology for clinical research sites?
I think it's only going to get better and more mainstream. And I do feel that we're heading towards the direction where EDC and eSource are going to be a marriage, and there may be less duplicity of redundancy of work, making sure that one job for one person and the right qualified individuals looking at the right thing, so that we can have more time to do other things and maybe do it more efficiently.
What about you, Raymond?
Well, we can somewhat control our destiny, so I can tell you that the direction I think we want to go in, interoperability, broadly speaking.
Yes.
Really, the eSource is more than just data collection. It's a workflow platform for sites, and there's absolutely no reason sites need to be struggling with different logins and redundant data entry across systems with interoperability enabled. So that's going to be our focus point. It is going to require that sponsors work with us, other vendors work with us. It takes two, right? Like, we can't just randomly connect into someone else's system here. People need to understand that, right? But we're going to make every attempt on our end to make our system work well with all the other systems out there. That's the direction we're headed down.
That's amazing.
Lauren, Mitch, this is the closer question. What do you guys think?
You go first for me.
You can take it.
Beyond what they said, I would say I think that our industry is becoming much more open-minded. COVID, as Dr. Gunn so graciously highlighted, shoved us into this technology closet and made us kind of forced to use these tools. And I feel like we're finally further beyond that, where we have become more open-minded. We've become more willing to hear, willing to incorporate, willing to adapt. I hope that the next generation of research professionals, and as people continue to grow and come up into leadership and continue to develop their skills in the industry, they are innovating that change from the top down.
Nice. Mitch?
As far as the tech adoption, when it comes specifically to eSource, it's ultimately going to become either you adopt and you thrive, or you don't and you kind of just fall behind. It's a little bit easier for some of these sites that are being acquired by networks, or sites that are partnering with networks that already have some of that infrastructure. But if you're not adopting, I definitely see it's where those qualification visits are coming in, those pre-study site selection visits, and then it's like, well, what are you using, right? Are you on paper? What are those policies? Are you on eSource? What systems are you using? Because that's going to be an impact and an influencer for that site selection process from the ClinOps team, because they want those efficiencies.
I like what Raymond had to say, especially with IQVIA Technologies coming out with One Home. I do think interoperability is a huge thing that will be coming up in the next year. We can't do anything without saying AI when we talk about technology. AI is everywhere, and I wouldn't be surprised, Raymond, if Creo has some kind of an AI situation in the future, likely the next year. Never know. And finally, most importantly, the big hump that I was really looking at is that percentage on the SCRS survey. The more sites that give eSource a chance, the more validation eSource can have. And you're going to see historically kind of what happened with electronic medical records. it's very rare to see a doctor's office with paper charts anymore. Most of the time, doctor's offices have electronic medical records. That wasn't the case in the early 2000s. And we even had doctors saying, well, if they go to EMRs, I'm going to retire. I'm over this. So I think we're seeing the rendition of healthcare records in eSource. If you make that comparator, we're actually on a much faster timeline. I'm really surprised at how fast it's adopted. So importantly, we are out of time. Any last words? Anyone else?
Just
gotta go, man.
we're on a trip. Just thank you to you both. In all honesty, like the fact that you guys were having this innovative conversation a year ago, and to see how far we've come since that conversation, and how far we still need to go. Right? I think that that's a really cool thing. But you're bringing up some really wonderful topics in a scenario where we all need to work to adapt and continue to grow inside of this space in the field. So thank you both so much for your expertise on it.
Yep. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gunn, Raymond. It means a lot to me that you came on to interview. You've inspired me. Please subscribe to CRPN Central on YouTube. Check out Diversa Trials. Follow us on LinkedIn. Tune in for some of the best content in the industry online. And we'll see you guys later. And thanks so much, Mitch.
Thank you.